I'm going to wait one more minute.
You started at one that's exactly four. One that's exactly four by that clock.
Jane's gonna say the first word.
Oh, who?
Jane.
Oh, Jane, it's my eyesight. I don't know who I'm talking to half the time.
That's okay. I'd like to talk to you.
Thank you. You start at 4:00 by
I'm
that
ready.
clock.
By that clock,
By that clock.
it's just 1 minute. 3, 2. Shortly after I moved into Timbercrest, I decided there should be a memoir writing class. An announcement was made and was formed. We were formed. In the beginning days, we even had a few men. We would meet, read our writing, and offer comments and suggestion. Our first assignment was to write on a keepsake. I had a book of examples, and the book is right here. And I did this when I didn't do it, but my writing is in here, and some of my friends are in here, including Peggy Gilbert. Of course, this book was done in 2014. Anyway, we started with the keepsake. So the topics for writing were never hard to find. There were people, new people, old people, whatever, places that we knew 10 years ago or that we just moved to, old and new events, things, feelings. We soon had a page full of subjects. Noting April is Poetry Month, we had lessons on writing all kinds of poetry. Haiku, singing, limericks, couplets, free verse. We wrote and hoped to have a reading, but the pandemic hit. With Joan Fa's help, our poems were placed around the manor house. Some of you contributed your own, and we had 2 displays. We had already begun collecting some of our work in notebooks, which were in the library and the hub. I hope some of you were able to read those. We hope to add more notebooks. Some members came to us writing well. Just a minute. Some members came to us writing, others tell how they have improved. Grace writes daily. Of course, our group was made stronger by Eileen, who seems to take care of everything, and Maria too. We are grateful for them and for one another. Our youngest and newest member, Peggy Gilbert, has overcome several obstacles to join us. Our present members have selected a piece to read, and you will hear them now.
I'm Marie Willoughby, and this was written in September of 2021, called A Rare Experience. In August 1977, our country was experiencing a gas shortage, among other issues. Because of this, the schedule at Camp Brethren Heights, Rodney, Michigan, adapted. This meant that a 6-day week of camp could begin any day of the week. Don and I were deans at Camp 78, the camp for those entering grades 7 and 8. Our week began on Friday afternoon. When we arrived late morning, we said hello to our two youngest children, Brenda and John, who were just finishing Camp 45. They would go home with our neighbor, Jan Thomas, who had been a counselor that week, and stay with her the next week while we were at camp. With us were our daughter, Carolyn, who would be a camper, and our oldest daughter, Anne, who was assisting at the waterfront. Also with us was Don's 87-year-old dad, who'd been living with us for almost 2 years. Camp 78 got off to a good start with the usual swim test, supper, vespers, campfires Friday evening. Saturday was a normal day at camp, and with a great group of counselors, Don had no qualms about going home to conduct a funeral that afternoon. Grandpa really enjoyed watching our Saturday evening activity, a square dance on the hill. As deans, we slept in the main lodge. Showers in the lodge were in the lower floor restrooms. As was his Sunday morning practice, Grandpa got up early, went down the stairs, took his shower, and started back up. He had been told not to go up and down those stairs by himself. He hadn't been using stairs for several years. Sunday, 6 a.m., we heard a loud noise and knew right away what it was. Don jumped out of his bunk shouting, "You weren't supposed to go downstairs without help." But there was his dad, crumpled at the bottom of the stairwell. He must have fallen at least 5 or 6 steps. Very quickly, Roger Hart, our lifeguard, was there. Don and Roger, dressed as fast as they could, moved the van to the kitchen door. Roger got the back seat out, spread blankets, and soon William Elmer Willoughby was on his way to the hospital in Big Rapids, 17 miles away. From the hospital, Don called the camp. Grandpa was being taken by ambulance to Blodgett Hospital in Grand Rapids, another 50 miles, and Don was going to ride along in the ambulance. Roger brought our van back to camp, and Sunday morning activities went as scheduled. Well, I think so. At 10:30 a.m., Don called again from Grand Rapids. His brother Dave, who was teaching at the Blue Lake Music Camp and fortunately wasn't at home in New Mexico, had been called, and Dave was also at Blodgett Hospital. Unfortunately, their father died at 10:20 a.m. It was determined that he had had a stroke before he fell, so more calls were made. There was a telephone in the Lakeview Church of the Brethren in the town of Brethren, and in the heat of things, I made a call there and talked to the head usher. Besides letting that congregation know that their pastor's father had died suddenly, I asked him to drive to the Marilla Church and let them know at the 11 o'clock service. The churches are 13 miles apart, and Don was pastor of both. What I didn't think about at the time was that 10-year-old Brenda and 9-year-old John would be at the church when the news arrived. Nor did I think about how the news of their beloved grandfather would make them feel. Well, Dave brought Don back to the camp Sunday afternoon, and the counselors did a good job. So Don and I drove the 75 miles to Caliva, met with the funeral director, and Dave went back to the music camp near Muskegon. Their 3 other brothers and their sister were included in phone calls and decision making. Sunday evening, Don and I went back to the camp and stayed until Tuesday afternoon. Afterwards, people expressed how impressed they were with how we managed and carried out our responsibilities in a number of places during this experience. Grandpa's funeral was Wednesday, August 10. Don stayed home to fly to Bridgewater, Virginia the next day for a memorial service there and the burial beside his mother. I went back to camp on Wednesday. This was Camp 78's last evening, so there was ice cream making and the sacred campfire. Thursday morning, after cabin cleanup, we had the awaited water carnival, lunch, and the closing service. I'd say my week as dean of Camp 78 in August of 1977 was indeed a rare experience.
I'm Joanne Scholl. My piece is titled Regrets. Regrets, I've had a few, but not too many. I can still hear Frank Sinatra singing that song. I echo his sentiments. Regrets are a waste of time, but still they do occur. One of my regrets is that I didn't listen to my parents' and grandparents' stories. They didn't reminisce very often. Life in the here and now were demanding and busy for them. Their energy and concerns were for the present. That alone should have alerted me to pay attention when they did tell about an event related to their past. I do remember a few of their stories. Dad and his buddies loved to swim in a small pond near his home in their scratchy wool bathing suits. Dad sang on a radio show in Kokomo once a week as a young man. And then there was the time when his Model T Ford died in a large puddle, and he whipped out his guitar and sang to his date, who happened to be my mother later. This followed a year at Manchester College where he tried to date 100 girls before his best friend did. What was the rest of that story? Who won? And my mother had stories of times she and her brother spent happy hours with a large circle of friends. Mom was a talented artist. She did the pen and ink sketches that decorated the Kokomo High School yearbook the year she was a senior. She was offered a scholarship for the John Herron Art Institute in Indianapolis, but she turned it down because it was too far away from her family. And a rare opportunity lost. Did she have regrets? Grandma told stories too. She told about how she accompanied her older brother to the one-room school one day as a 5-year-old. She got thirsty during the long lessons, so she drank the closest liquid she could find, a bottle of ink from her brother's desk. She was sent home in disgrace from her first visit to the school. Later, she cleaned the school and made the fire in the pot-bellied stove every evening or morning to help pay her school fees. As a young mother, my grandmother rented out some rooms in her upstairs apartment over the candy store she and my grandfather owned because he left for several months to help friends open a candy business somewhere in the East, and money was tight at home. I've seen a picture of my grandfather with an attractive young woman on his lap, taken while he was out east. I'd love to know the rest of that story. The people who have come before us had rich lives, full of dreams and energy we ourselves experience. Yet the young often don't want to hear about those dusty old days. I usually rolled my eyes and daydreamed when my relatives told their stories. Now, years later, I'm left with just a few family stories and regrets.
The topic for March, can you guess what it might be? Every month seems to have a topic that matches it. And I thought this poster would be a great visual for what my memory of March would be. I guess you're too far away to see it, but when you leave, you can take a better look. It's a lot of pictures of basketball memories from when my son played ball. So my topic is March Madness. Are you ready? I transport myself back 57 years and see my 17-year-old self sprawled on the floor of a high school hallway, making huge banners and posters that say good luck. Our mighty Squires had just won the sectional after a long, arduous basketball season. I was lucky to be an integral part of the hullabaloo as a Manchester High School cheerleader. Almost 60 years later, I can still proudly chant our last 3 cheers after our sectional victory. Ready? Let's go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, we're going to Kokomo. And then the next one is sectional, regional, semi-state, sectional, regional, semi-state. And so the humdrum of school continues. Math, science, English, but of course, posters, banners, and pep session planning too. We were delirious with excitement, especially when we learned that a hotel room was booked for us in case we played for the regional championship the next day. My memories are still so crowded with that teenage angst and emotion and anxiety. I'll fast forward to the highlights of that memorable game. First, you must know that our opponent was Lebanon, and their team touted a big gun by the name of Rick Mount. Remember? Oh, somebody's nodding. A guy with the best basketball stats in the whole state. Even Kokomo preferred playing us rather than a team with Mount on it. So that's why the whole gym just rocked with support for little old us. It was the fourth quarter, late in the fourth quarter, and we were 2 points ahead when we started a rhythmic chant, "Be Lebanon, be Lebanon." The entire crowd was yelling with us. The sound was deafening. I'm getting so excited. The clock was ticking away, but it was Rick Mount who would bring that Lebanon team back to outscore us for the final buzzer. I can still see our wonderful athletic director, Joe Flaudry, a 5'3" man in a red sport jacket. He was walking toward us, the cheerleaders, with his arms open wide. My best friend and cheer partner, Jean, fell sobbing into his open arms while I dabbed endless tears of disbelief flooding from my eyes. Madness, mayhem, memories to savor, magnificence. Maybe all of these, but memories require perspective. So I'll take another interesting point of view. Let's go forward 30 years. And now this cheerleader has a 17-year-old son on the court. We are at the semi-state game at the Fort Wayne Coliseum, an all-time world record for Manchester High School. Never had we gone that far. Basketball madness had been born into our family's blood. My husband, Bob, played for South Bend Adams and then got a basketball scholarship to Ball State University. So still to this day, he welcomes a baby boy into this world with these words. He's cute, but does he have a jump shot? Needless to say, he and Tom shot endless hoops on our carport backboard, crafted lovingly by Tom's grandpa, Don. Also, throughout grade school, Tom spent every single recess playing basketball. The triumphant dream of a state championship played its part in every imaginary game. He played on a team with kids of like-minded madness, and we loved them all. Tim Pitts, Brian Carr, Matt Eberly, Matt Frieden. They were undefeated through junior high, and once they were in high school, they were especially adamant about winning on their home court. Lose at home? Never. And this was all before class basketball. So they competed with the large Fort Wayne schools. And during their senior year, they were rated number 3 in the state. In a game against Bishop Dwenger, Fort Wayne, Tom was recognized on the Fort Wayne Evening News for his three-point shooting. Swish, swish, nothing but net. So after beating Huntington and Plymouth in the regional, they were headed to Fort Wayne for semi-state tournament. And the state champion, could it be? Could it be? Nope. Our opponent was South Bend Clay, and some of those guys ended up in Division I schools. 3 of them eventually played in the NBA. Our flawless team started with small mistakes, but things went from bad to worse. Tom hit some free throws, but nothing was enough. We could feel their heartache from the court, from the bottom of the court to the very top row of the Coliseum. My perspective has changed. I was still a cheerleader, but now I was a cheerleader for my son. I have concluded that our fans sometimes take the team's success as part of their own identity. I notice, though, that people can be extremely judgmental toward kids who are playing their hearts out to win their dream, not just for themselves, but also for all those armchair analyzers. We as parent cheerleaders are still so proud of the men our squires became and the influence or perspective they accumulated because of their basketball experience. March, maddening, madness, yes. Memories, tears, cheers, I'll take every single one of them. March, magnificent, yes.
I'm Grace Voorhees, and I'm going to read about Jello. Jello is a generational food. My generation used Jello in so many, many ways. It was a dessert, a salad, a main dish, depending on its ingredients. I doubt that my children make many Jello dishes, and probably my grandchildren never use the stuff. The Brethren published several cookbooks, beginning with the Inglenook Cookbook in 1911. Then came Granddaughter's Inglenook Cookbook, 1948, and several years later, an update. The original Inglenook Cookbook was filled with Jello and gelatin recipes. The next one, not quite so many, but with more accurate instructions. The updated book decried the use of any gelatin. I don't have the book to be able to quite quote it precisely, but it stated that it was passé to use Jello. Only 1 or 2 recipes were included using this wiggly, easy to digest food. The editors said Jello should only be used with fruit, never vegetables. I think my generation used gelatin to keep salads fresh or maybe to prolong their life. I made carrot salad and served it fresh for a meal, then mixed it into orange or lemon Jello, and it would last the week out, fresh as fresh could be. I made coleslaw the same way, using lime Jello later. Waldorf salad was served fresh for a meal and then inserted into lemon Jello. It stayed fresh for several days. Same with cranberry relish with raspberry Jello. Rhubarb sauce in Jello is a culinary delight. Whipped Jello with whipped cream and fruit was an eye-appealing dessert. Bananas in red Jello was a special way of preserving the life of the banana tastefully. I had a recipe using cottage cheese, cooked spinach, finely chopped celery and onion, and a bit of mayonnaise and vinegar in lemon jello. I served it with sour cream, and it was especially enjoyed at women's fellowship lunches. Jello has little color, or, or it has, excuse me, Jello has little odor, so smell is not its specialty. It does have a beautiful, strong color depending on its kind. Raspberry, cherry, strawberry, lemon, lime, or orange. Each added color and texture to the most unappetizing sight of foods. It was slippery, sliding down easily. It was great for the ailing patient. It was easy to digest. I still like to drink the warm liquid after making a batch. When I have a cold or just don't feel good, I turn to this Epicurean delight for relief and sustenance.
One assignment was to think about our special day we had not long ago on February 22nd, 2022. And since I'm not really a number person, but my husband is, I asked him to think this through with me. We had a lot of fun with it. My story of two, written on 02/22/2022. On September 2, my husband Bob was born. He graduated from Purdue in 1952. We dated off and on for about 2 years. We got married in August of 1952. We moved to Perry Township, south of Indianapolis, in 1962. We had a family of 2 girls and 2 boys. My sister Bonnie had 2 boys and 2 girls. My sister Sally had 2 girls and 2 boys. My sister Jackie was born August 22nd, 1945. She adopted 2 children. We remodeled 2 old houses. We moved to Timbercrest. As of today, we have 2 granddaughters, 2 grandsons, and 2 great-grandchildren. We are now too tired to think of many more 2s tonight, maybe tomorrow.
My name is Eileen Flory. For our other meeting in February, we assigned ourselves to write about anything about love. I wrote a piece called Our Wedding. There we stood in our overcoats on November 22nd, 1971, across the desk from Mr. Hartke, a justice of the peace, on the second floor of a St. Paul, Minnesota building whose heat was already turned off in preparation for the building's demolishment. 2 questionable-looking lawyers from down the hall served as witnesses. Mr. Hartke, feeling the need to expound a bit before he pronounced us husband and wife, was saying something about the value of good communication in a marriage when his phone rang. He interrupted himself to answer it, and we were treated to his end of a conversation with another client. No, you have to remember that she gets the house. An odd beginning for a most successful marriage. Jim and I had met 2 years earlier in the cafeteria of Indiana University's graduate student dorm. We soon discovered that we had a lot in common. First of all, we were both just back from summer programs in rural Mexico. We both had Quaker connections, and we became involved in the Bloomington Friends Meetings college-age youth group. On our own, we camped out at nearby state parks, studied together, and just hung out. After Jim got his master's degree in sociology, and after we had agreed to get married, Jim interviewed for 3 community college teaching jobs in central and southern Minnesota. He figured that was the most efficient trip he could take over a long weekend off from his summer job in West Lafayette. He ended up accepting a position at a nice new community college in a St. Paul suburb, where he ended up teaching for 16 years. My situation in Bloomington got complicated when my advisor was killed in a plane crash in Europe on his way to a conference. That, plus a great guy waiting for me up in Minnesota, triggered a decision not to pursue my PhD in ethnomusicology. So I flew up to St. Paul from Bloomington, having sent my 2 footlockers ahead on the bus. Jim had just started attending the Twin Cities Friends meeting, Quakers, and hardly knew the people there, or we would have been married in that meeting. Of course, the Bloomington meeting would have gladly married us, but Jim couldn't really get the necessary time off from his new teaching job. So that's how we ended up freezing in Mr. Hartke's St. Paul office. We had a lovely celebration that same night. The Twin Cities meeting had just started a new round of what they called groups of 8, in which groups of 8 or so people got together monthly for a meal and fellowship. Jim had signed up, and a member had called him up to ask if he would be bringing anyone. He said, maybe. They asked who, and he said, she might be my wife. We had a great time with the group on our wedding night. I could go on and on about how Jim and I have had many good years of outdoor activities, activism, and learning and laughing together. But this is just the story of our wedding. A strange one it was.
I'm Wendy Metzger, and 1 month, I think it was November, one suggestion was to write on gratitude. In 1980, my health began a slow decline. I began to get a serious throat cold every month. After several months, it became clear that I needed some meds to control the symptoms each occurrence. About 1981, the pigmentation of my skin was slowly growing darker. Since I was engaged in farming at the time, we all assumed it was due to exposure to the sun. It was a bit confusing when this phenomenon continued through the winter months. Tiredness, at the level I wasn't accustomed to, progressively became a part of life. I didn't think too much about this since I was farming while pregnant. In December 1982, I delivered my second child by cesarean section. At that time, this type of delivery required a 3 or 4 day stay in the hospital. As was the practice at the Manchester Clinic, the doctors rotated days for hospital rounds. One day, Dr. Wilbur McFadden did rounds. He wasn't my family doctor, but he had performed the surgery. Once he was satisfied with my progress, I heard him in the hallway asking the nurse about my pigmentation. Although they were talking quietly, I heard the nurse tell him I had no tan lines. Shortly, he was back in my room asking a different set of questions regarding my health. He then kindly informed me that he suspected I had Addison's disease, which he had only seen one other time. He said he couldn't be sure, but recommended I see an endocrinologist. His suspected diagnosis was later confirmed. Years later, Dr. McFadden was a member of a Timbercrest Board of Trustees subcommittee. During a planning retreat, I was seated by him at a meal, which provided me the perfect opportunity to thank him for essentially saving my life. I remain grateful to him for seeing beyond the current circumstances of surgery recovery and observing my whole person.
I do have a piece, but do we need to end or can we go on? Okay. It is easy to be grateful for the arrival of spring after winter storms. Timbercrest has finally been colored with purple dots in the woods and daffodils popping up in many neighborhood yards. But we were leaving on this drab rainy day, heading east. Even before leaving Indiana, we found greening grass sparkling wet. In southern Ohio came the Bradford pear, blooming in rows and perfuming the air. We found budding forests with purple splashes of redbud, trees peeking out, rows of daffodils and jonquils continued their glory. I am grateful to once again drive through the beautiful hills of West Virginia, where the dogwood appeared with their teacup blossoms heralding the approach of Easter. I am not sure if the vistas are more glorious from the valley, looking at the layers of the hills with the Blue Ridge in the back, or from the top looking down after a misty rain. We saw clouds below us, which might be called smoke on the mountains. It could seem as a wide, white river, incredible. I wanted to wander on the Shenandoah Skyway or stop by Natural Bridge, but we did need to move on. Wisteria guided us with its lively boughs of purple. Looking at New River cutting below us with its rapids providing scenery and adventure. I wish I could repeat that thrill. The next day, we continued past the Blue Ridge Parkway with its high, winding, slow beauty. One more surprise awaited: fields of gold blooming canola, and then the azaleas right on schedule for the Masters. Our road trip to the Outer Banks was an adventure on its own, but still, we found two more friends who had flown down to join us for a weekend finding lighthouses, wild horses, islands, beaches, dunes, the lost colony, fresh seafood, ocean smells and sounds. I am grateful for the arrival of spring and the time to enjoy it with special friends. So thank you all for coming. As you heard, some of these were, okay, sorry. Some of these were mainly descriptive. Some of these were very narrative. Some of these were really recalling, I even wrote one time about what I found in a person's pocket and what all that meant. So there's always something to remember or write about. So we enjoyed the class, and you can join us if you like. going to play, but that had to be canceled for some reason, right, Eileen, your hand?
Is this going?
I don't know where it goes.